Real in the field. It's fieldgoals.com. Kenny, Danny, and many others talking about football. Seattle Seahawks gotta live forever. At least they're gonna compete.
Wow, a historic moment here in Field Goals podcast history. For the first time, someone sent us a theme song. Oh, and it started playing again. But hey, Danny, someone sent us a theme song. That was David Fagerholm, when we've been calling for a theme song this whole time. And that was a bit of a cruel thing because I wanted to make sure that everyone could hear it. So it was a little bit of a crude playing because I was playing it off of another device just so we could all hear it and talk about it. But Danny, what did you think?
That sounds good. I'll try and maybe we can try and add it like to the actual.
Yeah.
Thing.
Next time we'll. But I think it's awesome. I think it sounded like really professional.
It did, yeah. When I heard that you had a submission, my hopes weren't especially high, but I was surprised with how good it was, and so it was definitely awesome.
There's a lot of talented musicians out there, and some of them listen to Real in the Field Goals. So David Fagerholm, thank you. I think that some other people have been telling me they're going to send in some stuff, so we'll see what happens with that, and keep on working on making sure next time, whatever it is, maybe not as crude as me playing it off of another laptop into this mic. But
Yeah.
This is Kenneth Arthur, and this is Real in the Field Goals, and that was a buzzing noise. And with me is Danny Kelly, of course. Danny, hello.
Hello.
And today is May 14th, 2015, and our guests are Davis Sue and Derek Stevens. Davis, a cap expert, they would say, that you should know from Field Goals and Twitter. Davis, how's it going?
Doing good.
And Derek Stevens of CBS Sports and NFLDraftScout.com and Lindy's report. Derek, how's it going?
Going well, man. Going well.
Good stuff, guys. Davis is his second time on the show and Derek's first, and both of them coming on for the first time since the Seahawks had their draft and picked a bunch of guys, and all of them with no controversy whatsoever, I'm pretty sure. But let's just get a little bit of overarching thoughts. Davis, just as a whole, what did you think of the Seahawks draft class?
I thought it was interesting how they moved up, for Tyler Lockett and kind of, I remember in 2013 they drafted 11 times and, like only 6 guys made the team or something like that. So when they were sitting with 11 draft picks and they seemed pretty intent on, consolidating that a little bit and really going after some guys. So I thought that was kind of one of the big things that I took away with.
Derek, and what did you think? What was your kind of initial reaction to seeing the new personnel the Seahawks got to work with now?
Yeah, I would say a lot of non-surprises in the sense of probably a lot of people going, asking who's that with some of these picks, particularly the Frank Clark pick. Of course, I was aware of Frank Clark, but certainly did not see him going that high with the sort of the baggage, and obviously that's been played out pretty feverishly in the media. But I think just a lot of great athletes that weren't necessarily big names on a lot of the media boards out there. So that's par for the course, I think, for them these last few years. But you dig in a little bit deeper, you look a little bit closer, and it all makes sense, particularly the O-linemen, I think, just with the versatility to move around. Just very, very much Tom Cable guys, the toughness, the grittiness. And then the trade up for Lockett was that sort of the aberration, like Davis said. And I think it showed that as much as teams say, oh, we don't go for need, we go for the best player available, they valued him high enough to get him, and a lot of that was based on need. And that really goes back to Pete Carroll's system of ball control and field position. I think that's why they value Tyler Lockett so highly, aside from what he can do as a receiver. So all in all, I thought it was pretty typical Seahawk draft, but with one or two surprises. I think that was the biggest surprise.
Did you have a like a favorite pick out of all the players, Derek?
I really like the Ty Smith pick. I think that is going to be one that people look at later and they say, "Wow, that was another one of those awesome DB value finds in the later rounds." He is. I mean, he's a consummate Seattle DB. I mean, he's scrappy, he's physical, he's long, he's rangy. He's got really good cover skills. A lot of people, I think, complain. I don't complain is the word, but a lot of people skeptical of the 40 time. But I think he's a fluid mover, and if you can press at the line, the 40 time is not really something that I think you have to be too concerned about when a guy can get his hips around that quick. So that's where a lot of guys who run 4.3, 4.4 40s, they can still get beat because they don't have that hip fluidity and they don't have the ability to jar guys at the line to put themselves in position to run stride for stride. And he accelerates well. So I think that's a really good pick. That was my favorite pick, I would say, of the crop there.
Going to your what you guys have talked about, Tyler Lockett and or Davis mentioned that was kind of a surprise moving up to get him. I was thinking about this the other day. The two main offensive players that the Seahawks got, skill players this offseason, Jimmy Graham and Tyler Lockett, they both gave up a lot to get both of those guys, so they obviously really liked those guys. I was thinking, if you think about sort of the reasoning behind it, number one, Jimmy Graham, what are the two main areas the Seahawks struggle in on offense? That would be third down and in the red zone. And he immediately kind of fixes that. And then if you look at their return game last year, it was just atrocious. And so if you put those two guys together, it's kind of interesting to imagine how much better the offense could be, since they're going to be theoretically they'll be starting further down the field and improving on third down and in the red zone. It'll be interesting to see how many more points they score with those two main guys kind of contributing.
Yeah, I think they like Tyler Lockett as a receiver as well, and I think they kind of soft pedaled that initially, just kind of like they were soft pedaling Russell Wilson. I think when they first got him, they were like, "Well, we'll see. He might not play. We don't know that." But I think they wouldn't have done all that just to get a returner. With Tyler Lockett, they're not going to trade 4 picks just to get a returner, even if he's the best returner available in the draft. I mean, they traded for Leon Washington. He was one of the best returners in football. They traded a 5th-round pick for that. So it's more than just the return ability. Obviously, that's a big factor, but there's more that they like there with Tyler Lockett.
Davis, would you say that you got a sort of an idea of what positions are of need, where it's going to be really hard to make the roster? Which of these guys do you think? I mean, considering that really with the Seahawks, once you get past the 3rd round, it doesn't matter where you're drafted. Everyone's sort of just competing, and you don't know who's going to make it and who's not going to make it. They regularly cut 4th-round picks the first year. So who's going to have the hardest time making the roster, do you think?
I think probably Obum Gwacham, I think, might have the hardest time, just because between him, Eric Pinkins, and Mike Morse, that might be 2 spots, I think, possibly. So I think that might be hard. I think Ty Smith gets in there. I think Ryan Murphy can take the 4th safety spot along with Deshaun Shedd. So I actually like Murphy's chances better than Gwacham. I think they could find a way for Gwacham, but that would be the first one that kind of jumps out. The other one would be Sicoli, just because, if he doesn't come along, could they try to put him on the practice squad? Would his value to another team be diminished because, he's kind of in this transitionary stage, and would he have value to another NFL team as a defender or an offensive player? I don't know. So those would be the guys that kind of come to mind.
I had the opportunity to talk to Christian Sicoli yesterday, doing an interview for RollingStone.com that'll be coming out soon, and seems like a really good guy, the type of guy that you really want to root for, that's really willing to work and knows how hard it's going to be for himself to make the transition over to the offensive side of the ball, Derek, do you have any sort of thoughts in terms of sort of what Tom Cable said about college? College is not doing a good job of preparing offensive linemen for the NFL, and that no matter what, Cable's getting guys that he has to completely change anyway.
I'm gonna jump in there real quick. We lost Derek. I'm calling him back right now.
Oh, okay. Well, this happens sometimes.
Yeah. But Derek?
Yes, I'm back.
All right.
Okay, so I'm assuming Derek didn't hear any of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. He did not.
Okay, great. So, guys, this is what happens on Real in the Field Goals. Got to keep it real in the field. Goals. All right, so.
Right up to Obum Watchum is kind of where I dropped out. David.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just saying everything that happened after Obum Watchum doesn't matter. No. Okay, so Christian Sicoli, he's moving over to the offense side of the ball. Any thoughts on what Tom Cable said as far as offensive linemen in college and how he has to retrain all of them anyway, so it's sort of almost nicer to get guys that are starting from scratch?
I would say, yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think that it is hard to watch college linemen right now and get a sense that they're of how technically sound they are. I don't think it comes across so obviously that they aren't technically sound. I think that it doesn't come across very clearly how perceptive they are about certain things. I think a lot of it is the quick hit offenses. The ball comes out so quick. The guys are asked to do things on the line that really don't require them to sustain blocks for long periods of time and things like that. So it's hard. It's getting harder to evaluate linemen. And as a guy like Cable having the knowledge, it goes way beyond mine or anyone else outside of the NFL. The more he gets into workouts with these guys, he's probably seeing a lot of that, just at a more technical level, and just asking them questions about situations, scenarios. So I think that's one thing I love about Tom Cable is he doesn't mince words. He's not politically correct. And with Pete Carroll and guys like Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson and even John Schneider at times being so politically correct, it's kind of a breath of fresh air to have a guy like Tom Cable who just doesn't really care. Just kind of tell you like it is. So I admire that, and I think he's right on about that.
I kind of wanted to go through each player that the Seahawks drafted and then maybe some of the undrafted free agents and kind of talk about first of all, their shot at the final roster and more specifically kind of what their fit is for their first year. The guys that they'll push, the role that they'll be playing, how much playing time we'll expect them to be getting. So I'll just name off some guys, and then you guys can kind of speak on that in terms of what sort of role you guys see these guys having this year. I know I text with Derek and Davis all the time, so we kind of spitball on fit and who these guys are going to be taking.
I just want to note that Danny doesn't text me all the time, so go ahead.
So first of all, Derek or Davis, how do you see Frank Clark fitting in this year in terms of all those things?
I think he's going to get like 30 snaps a game,
Really?
On the edge, yeah, I do. If they're going to make that big of a risk on him, I think they believe in this guy. I mean, maybe it's 20, but it's not. I don't think it's going to be 40. But I could see 20 or 30 snaps a game for him, and I could see him a little bit on the left, a little bit on the right. I don't know if they're going to ask him to drop back in coverage too much, or maybe a little bit on the inside rush, but. I think there's a place because Chris Clemens, that was a big role, and if Bruce Irvin doesn't have a long-term future here, you might as well get Frank Clark in there, definitely on third down on one of the edges.
Davis, I know how many snaps a game are, but for people that don't, can you kind of put that in context? 30 snaps a game, and that would make him as regular as Bruce Irvin, as one of the more regulars on the defensive line because they switch out a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that would be on the level of a lot of the linemen they play. Obviously, Michael Bennett had a lot more than that, but that would be on par, with a Brandon Mebane or a Jordan Hill, that type of thing, where there's a high rotation. In a typical NFL game, there's about 64 defensive snaps, the way the Seahawks play, that number's closer to 60 because they like to shorten the game on both offense and defense. So, if you end up having, 30 snaps a game, you're basically playing half the snaps. Again, on the D-line, that's pretty good, and that also benefits the other players on the defensive line as well.
And Derek, talking about Tyler Lockett, how do you kind of see him fitting into the offense in that same sense? Like, how many snaps do you think he's going to get? Where do you think he'll get them? How big of a role will he have in year one?
Yeah, I think, Darrell Bevel's play calling is always very, it's not really, I should say it. The beginning of last year was really predictable. So many bubble screens and all of that. I think they learned from the Percy Harvin experiment not to try too many gadgety types of passes. I don't think they're going to overutilize him on offense to begin with. I think you'll see him work into the offense. There's one thing about Tyler Lockett that even Percy Harvin didn't have and that nobody else on this roster has, and that's an elite ability to create quick, rapid separation in a short area. I mean, he's shake guys off. I mean, it's equivalent of like an Allen Iverson crossover at times when you see him with a guy following him around, what he can do with just his suddenness, his stop-start ability. So I don't think he'll be out of the offense from the beginning. I think he'll be involved in the offense, but I think you'll see him underneath. If you see trips set, I think he'll be off the line of scrimmage, so he has some space to work with, because one thing is sure on the tape from college, the guy gets his hands on him and he can be manipulated pretty easily off the line of scrimmage, even by some smaller corners. So I think he's got to work on his strength. But I do see him in some space, drag routes, things like that, just third down, finding space, sitting down. I mean, he's really aware and really savvy. And I think he's a guy that, Russell's going to have to hit him right in the numbers. I don't think he's a guy that's got a huge catching radius or anything of that nature. I think he really is you got to spot the ball perfectly with him within just a foot or two of his frame. But if you do that, he's going to be finding space. He's going to be sitting down. So I think through the season, you'll see him work in more underneath, whereas maybe a guy like Baldwin can maybe take it down the seam more and use some of his pull-away acceleration to his benefit. But nobody's got the suddenness like Lockett. So obviously in the return game, he's going to be massive. But I really think underneath in those third and 3 to third and 6 yard situations, he'll be utilized a lot. And I think it will be a lot from the beginning in those situations.
There's two starting positions open on the offensive line. Really, right now, it's up for grabs. It seems like it's going to be a long shot for any of these unexperienced centers to take over Patrick Lewis. But then you got the left guard, and you got Terry Poole and Mark Lewinsky. These were the next two picks. Davis, any thoughts on that left guard battle?
I think Alvin Bailey is going to be the left guard, so I don't know if we're going to see a lot of Terry Poole. I'm hoping he becomes a center because I think he's a more promising and more ready center than Sokoley or Poole, even though I know they've thought about using Poole and Sokoley at center as well. But I think Lewinsky's a smoother, more technically ready kind of player, and I think he could actually do it. So I'm kind of hoping he wins the job, although the Seahawks haven't really talked about him as a center, at least not in the media.
Oh, we lost Derek again.
It's been one of those days, folks. A lot of technical glitches, but let's go on. So are we going to call Derek back?
Yeah, we'll get him back. Just
we could talk about Ty Smith, or we can keep going through while they're getting him back on.
Well, we knew Derek really liked Ty Smith. What do you want to say about Ty Smith?
I don't know if Ty Smith, because I was hoping he would be our nickel guy, really, and they kind of talked that down on the initial press conference that he was more of an outside corner, where we really don't have a nickel corner right now unless you want to Marcus Burley or possibly Wilson. So I think it sounds like Kerry Williams will likely be the other outside corner that took Byron Maxwell's spot, and then Jeremy Lane might not see the field for a long time, at least in the beginning of the season. I don't know if sometimes when those initial press conferences, they don't want to put pressure on a guy, or they want to start him kind of at the easiest position for them. And then other times, they're totally moving a guy. So if Ty Smith could be the nickel, I think that would be really, really cool. But it didn't seem like they were indicating that in the initial press conference.
Okay, I'm going to get Derek back on the line here. Didn't want to ring in the middle of Davis's.
Little peek behind the curtain.
This has been the smoothest one yet. What's up, Derek?
This is Derek. Hey, guys.
Hey, we got special guest Derek Stevens on the line.
How's everybody doing? Hey, man.
We're good.
Exit and an entrance.
So we just got Davis's thoughts on Ty Smith. Where do we take this now, Danny? We're a little. It's finally we've been shaken up a little bit, but it's all just part of. We're gonna blame Google, I think, Plus for sure.
So Derek, where do you see Poole, Glowinski? Do you think they can make and start, this season, or do you think they're going to be backups?
It's so hard to say because the JR. I said this the other day, I think, to somebody. The JR Sweezy story, just it for anything to happen. And so I think that if a guy can come in having never taken a snap on the offensive line and win the starting job at right guard, then guys who have shown that they can play this style and already have some semblance of knowledge for the zone system and play with the toughness that Tom Cable likes and are students of the game like Tom Cable likes, I don't see why there's any reason why they can't be on par with Alvin Bailey for battling for that spot. As far as a prediction, are the odds in their favor? Probably not. But they're certainly going to push him. And I think that there's a real opportunity in the next couple of years, particularly with Poole at the left guard spot, to have a mainstay there, the guy who can just really physically impose himself and play the physical style that Seattle likes without all of the weight fluctuations and injuries that you had with James Carpenter. I just think Poole is more that type of guy, and his personality and the way he plays with a chip on his shoulder. It's more indicative of the style that sort of is evolving into the Tom Cable style. So I think there's a chance, and I think there's as good of a shot as anyone coming into camp. But I do think Alvin Bailey being in the system for a couple of years, dropping the weight, understanding how the different calls and everything, I think he definitely has an advantage and a leg up for sure.
You're talking about Davis, Obum Gwacham and Ryan Murphy. Seen you guys talking about those guys on Twitter. Just they're kind of those core special teams guys. What's your impression on that? Do you think that Pete Carroll sort of selected these guys with special teams prowess in mind?
I do. If you're asking me, I definitely think that's a big part of Pete Carroll talked about Gwacham, how he was raw. He didn't really even know what he's doing, but he was excited to see him on special teams where he could just kind of go all out, balls to the wall, maximum effort, saying that's one reason why they selected him is because, the guy just went all out. And I think Ryan Murphy definitely is going to bring a lot. I think he could play, 4 to 5, 6 special teams units. He could return, he could cover, that type of thing. So I definitely think, the guys they're replacing, whether it be O'Brien Schofield or Jerron Johnson or Malcolm Smith, that when you're the backup type player in the linebacker or the safety position, I think special teams is pretty much your number one calling card.
And moving just to the undrafted free agents, I guess, did you have any favorites from that class, Davis? And do you think that any of them have a real shot at making the roster?
I think Jesse Davis was really, really interesting. Really good tester. I think he was like the top 12 spark tester on O-line, where the Seahawks ended up getting, 3 of the top 12, which would be Glowinski, Sokoli, and Jesse Davis. I know they like Rod Smith. I don't know. I guess he got hurt during the tryout, and so is he more of a fullback or is he a running back? Obviously, they signed Brandon Cotton, who's kind of like a fullback, H-back type, tested really well. Thomas Rawls is interesting. Torrey Slater, who they just IR waived today, and I don't know if that's a kind of a gamesmanship move to try to dash him, for next year.
Yeah.
Some of the other guys, I looked up some of at least their initial testing numbers, and like in terms of Quayshawn Neely, Alex Singleton, Ronald Martin, Tristan Wade, and Keenan Lambert, none of them really jumped out. They were kind of like bottom, quartile type testers.
Right.
And I think it's a really, really long shot to make the roster. But Jesse Davis, being that he plays right and left tackle, that's always kind of a more valuable type of position.
That's like the Gary Gilliam.
Yeah, he might be like maybe Jesse Davis slides in, especially if Sicoli really picks it up. They might not need to keep a Lemuel Jean-Pierre, and maybe Jesse Davis can kind of slip in. And then when you have in 2016, in terms of the running back situation, whether you keep Marshawn or you don't, and then Robert Turbin's going to be a free agent, and then Derek Coleman's going to be a restricted free agent. And the only reason why I bring that up is maybe you don't want to pay him $1.5 million on a tender or a negotiated tender because he's still a fullback.
Yeah.
That's why that you're seeing them kind of load up with the Rod Smith, the Brandon Cotton, the Thomas Rawls, just to kind of add numbers so you don't walk into the 2016 draft needing 2 to 3 players. That's kind of you don't really want to ever have to do that. So.
And Derek, what do you take of those 3 guys, Rod Smith, Brandon Cotton, and Thomas Rawls? Kind of what do you think of those 3 guys, and what strengths they bring, and if any of them have a shot at the roster?
I think Cotton is probably the guy in my mind that has the best shot at the roster, just because he can do 3 things for you. He can block, he can run the football in short yardage situations, and he can catch the football. I mean, there's plays that I saw of him post ACL, which ACL was early in his college career, and he really had no visible adverse effects from it following that, just watching him on the field. Still good explosion from a stop. I mean, you don't think of him as a 265 to 270 pound guy watching him on tape.
Yeah.
Because he's actually pretty quick. I think the thing that he brings though is that just really that threefold those attributes of catching, running, and blocking. And I think special teams will be a great opportunity for him to earn a spot. He's kind of like a Derek Coleman, but he's bigger, probably a little bit better of a receiver. And as far as a runner, I mean, he always averaged close to 5 yards. I can't remember what his numbers were in college, but I mean, he was close to 5 yards to carry, if I'm not mistaken. So I think he's got the best shot. Thomas Rawls, I mean, I know a lot of people have talked a lot about him. I personally think he just lacks. I feel like he lacks some explosion. Thinks his initial first step is decent, and he's got the ability to power through some tackles. But getting around the edge, it looks tough for him. So I don't think that he's got a very good shot of making the roster. And then with Rod Smith, there's a 4-star recruit, was a blue chip guy out of high school, had a lot of high hopes for him at Ohio State, and he just he disappointed with his grades. He disappointed with a few different things, and I think with the being cut from the team late in his career for drugs, so a few things there. But there's certainly talent with that guy. It's just a matter of, do they want to take a flyer on a guy like that? Which is why I go back to Cotton. I just think he's the most solid of the 3, and he's the most versatile of those 3.
And you did a scouting report on Quayshawn Neely. Do you think he has a shot at playing a role at all this year?
I think he could challenge a guy like a Mike Morgan just for a roster spot, and that's not necessarily with the same type of role, because he's probably not a guy who's going to get out on the edge and play a Leo type of a position like you can do with Morgan, because Morgan's kind of developed into being that versatile guy. But he's a really heady player. He had I think 6 picks going into his senior year as a linebacker, and I don't know if he had any more his senior year. I didn't look at his senior year stats. I kind of tuned out a little bit this year. But he has a nose for the football. He's good in coverage, and he can come up and make lay a pop. He reminded me of David Hawthorne. I think that's who I kind of compared him to. Just a guy with really good instincts, may not have all the athleticism, but knows where the ball is, flies to the football, and and plays that aggressive style, which is I can definitely see why they were attracted to him. So he's a guy that I think, because of the fundamentals and the instincts and just a nose for the football and a knack for making plays, he's a guy that I could see fitting in here and challenging some of the whether it's a Brock Coyle or a Mike Morgan or one of those guys sort of toward the back end of the rotation of linebackers. If he shows up on special teams, he'll definitely make it a competition.
Could he play in the middle?
Yeah, in fact, he rotated between all three spots in school, and so you saw him inside, you saw him outside, and he moved really well, had a good feel for space. In the box, he's tough. He's not the biggest guy, but he understands leverage and plays with leverage, and is a really solid fundamental tackler, which also is obviously very, very important to this administration, I guess you could say. So,
Davis,
I think he's versatile to move him around.
Davis, any major takeaways that you had from the rookie minicamp?
Kona Schwenke, this guy is a really, really athletic guy. I think, 2 or 3 teams gave him a chance on defensive line. He was at Notre Dame, kind of overshadowed by, Stephon Tuitt and Lewis Nix. But he was kind of a cool college player, and he had a really good testing. And then obviously, everyone was talking about signing Case and Williams after the camp, and the Seahawks go out and sign Kona Schwenke, And so, that's kind of interesting. Tyler Lockett looked like he was the star of the camp, and then, Case and Williams kind of was a storyline, but, I don't know what the rush would be to sign Case and Williams if there's no real market for a player. Like, there's no market. If you can't get on a roster right now when the rosters are at 90 men and, you're getting the paid minimum and you have club control for 4 years and no one's rushing to sign you, the Seahawks don't need to rush to sign him. They could kind of see what they have with other players or wait for an injury or whatever. So, as much as that would be kind of fun to sign him, at the same time, I can kind of see why there's no necessary rush to sign Case and Williams.
Derek, what about you? Any thoughts as far as the first week with the rookies out there?
Yeah, I think the wide receiver market is saturated, and I think that's why you didn't see Case and Williams get picked up initially. I think Seattle probably told him, and I've talked to a couple of people close to the organization. I think Seattle probably have basically told him, hey, stay ready. We like what we saw. We just don't really have the room at the moment. Kona Schwenke, from something that I had heard, was really the favorite in the rookie camp. The favorite of everybody. Amongst coaches, just the excitement around him and what they could possibly have found in him. That was something that I had heard, and obviously Tyler Lockett. But I think Schwenke will probably be the guy that out of this camp becomes the biggest surprise. He's got the chance to be the biggest surprise. I think everybody's expecting Tyler Lockett to be explosive, so I think that was more confirmation than it was catching anyone off guard in terms of his performance and what he showed in camp. I think Schwenke is really the guy that they're probably the most excited about in terms of potentially finding that sort of diamond in the rough guy. So.
Yeah, and I wonder how different the rookie camp has been, this year or in previous years, because I talked to a couple of the beat guys that watched the practices, and they were just saying that it was just ugly. They had a couple of, R.J. Archer. He played in the AFL, the Arena League, for a little while, and then there was another guy, Tyler Sikora, and there was another guy from TCU. And I think, just in general, it was probably really just sloppy. I don't even know how much they could really get out of everything other than a few, big plays here and there. And I think so it's potential that, Case and Williams' whole performance got a little bit, overblown, I'd say. But at the same time, I think, like Davis said, like a lot of these guys are probably, put them on the ghost roster, have them in your Rolodex, and tell them to be ready. And if they want to, get called up later, I think that's definitely something the Seahawks do. You'll notice they've already kind of cut and released a couple guys, and it's just, getting guys in, seeing how they fit, seeing how they interact with people, and kind of figuring out where they would fit, and then eventually down the line they can call these guys up and get them in. So.
Speaking of fitting, should we move on to probably some 53-man roster talk and sort of see where we see things lining up in September, even though, a lot's going to change. Every year there are surprises of guys who get cut and guys who go from undrafted free agent to making the team. Obviously, some of these guys come out there. Davis.
Kenneth, can I say one more thing about Kona Schwenke?
Let me check. Sure, why not?
He ran a 4.94 40 at 285 pounds, and his 10-yard split was 1.64, which is, that's not quite Christian Sokoli 10-yard split, but that's really, really, that'd be like Garrett Scott ran that, and he was like one of the best testers that, had ever shown up. And so that's a really quick 10-yard step for he's probably 300 pounds now. His vert was 29, which is solid, and his broad jump was 9 feet, and then his 3-cone was 7.19. And so for a 300-pound guy or 285, that's one of the lower. So this guy's got movement ability. That's one thing that they talk about. One thing that Chris Carlisle talks about. I've been watching old videos of him, and he had a video today on Seahawks.com on movement, and their philosophy is, basically the best football players are the best movers. It's all about movement, so developing the movement skills that you have, and then finding kind of the raw talent of people that are just good at moving, and I know it sounds so simple, but so it's not about, for their strength program, it's not about lifting the most weight or, power or squatting, the most weight or bench pressing the most. It's everything based on movement, and they believe that's how you win football games, by having the best movers. So. And
like Kona Schwenke when he went to Notre Dame, he weighed 217 pounds, and now he's listed at about 300. So he's gained about 80 pounds since he went to college. Now, for me personally, I went to Wazoo. I drank every night. I ate McDonald's every day, and I gained about the same in 3 years. But none of it was muscle, and assuming not all of this is muscle, but yeah, a totally different person. But you got to assume that when a guy changes that much, you still get to retain some of those skills, I suppose, when you were a lighter defensive end as opposed to being a guard or something like that. So
it's kind of like a Frank Clark or a Bruce Irvin. These guys, when they showed up, they could be in the low 200s, in some sense. And so there's just different body types, and some of these other players, when they're coming out, their bodies are just different than that, and they're kind of more like, that's an O-lineman type thing. And so if you can get some of these players that could be D-line players or tight ends, that type of body, but they can play O-line, then it's almost like you might be starting off with a little bit better kind of raw material possibly.
Yeah, and it's it's very interesting the way the Seahawks are handling roster building. It's a different way than we've seen most teams do it, and they don't necessarily see every person as a position, but more as a player that can fit into several places depending on how things shake out. So moving on to shaking out, Davis, you have already sort of a spreadsheet that predicts what sort of players will land on the 53 and what won't, right? Davis?
Of course he does.
I mean, that's what, as most Seahawks fans want to do, is make the spreadsheets of what sort of players will line up where. So, Danny, should we go on to the position by position?
Yeah, I think that works well. The first up, the most obvious position is the quarterback, and right now we still don't really know who the backup will be. Derek, do you have any sort of sense on what B.J. Daniels really is, and if they're really kind of desperate to get Tavares Jackson back in, or if they're high on R.J. Archer, or do you have any idea kind of what's going on at that position?
Yeah, I think they've kind of viewed Archer, I think, as sort of like a J.P. Losman the year that he came in. I think they feel like he has a chance to provide some depth and to be a guy who could potentially make the team. I think the issue with Tavares Jackson is he wants a shot to potentially be a starter somewhere, and I think that now he did mention Minnesota as a place that he might want to go as a backup, but I think he also understands that in Minnesota or any place where you've got a second-year quarterback who hasn't even played a full year, as happened with Christian Ponder a few years back. I mean, this seems to fall off quickly, and he had an he probably would have more of an opportunity to eventually be a starter there if something goes awry. So I think there's a money issue and a significance of role issue with Tavares Jackson, and I think that. Look, I'm not going to say anything about Russell Wilson negatively because I don't know for sure. But I've heard things here and there, and I guess it could be inferred that perhaps he rubs some people the wrong way in the quarterback room or whatever.
Derek, don't be afraid to give us a little exclusive, man. Go ahead and open up your heart and say what's there.
So I think that, look, I think they want Tavares Jackson back. I think that they're probably going to end up bringing Tavares Jackson back. And I think with B.J. Daniels, Danny, I think the guy can play quarterback. I don't think there's fundamentally many problems with him. I think the height is an issue for him, more so than it is for somebody like Russell Wilson, because Russell Wilson's obviously a very special guy. But I think he is so athletic and explosive that they are trying to think of, just similar to what you guys were saying a little bit ago, it's more about the athlete with him and where can you plug him in where he's going to have the biggest impact. And so if Tavares Jackson comes back, I do see a guy like B.J. Daniels sliding into more of a sort of a utility offensive weapon or even return game weapon potentially, where maybe a guy like Archer then can be a practice squad guy who you call up to put on as the third quarterback if you need him. So
yeah,
I don't know. I think Tavares Jackson's really the key to that whole thing, what he ends up doing, and I think they do want to bring him back, but I don't think that they're in a hurry to do that right now. They want to see how some other stuff shakes out. So.
That makes sense.
So then we just run on over to running back. That was not intended, but going back to running back, Davis. What do you think as far as the players that make it in terms of behind Marshawn Lynch for the running back position? How many of those guys are they going to keep?
I think they're going to keep 4, I think. And I think it'll be Turbin, Michael, Lynch. And I think the 4th one, it's either going to be Derek Coleman or maybe possibly Kotzum. You know, that would be cool for the long-term future of the roster. You control a guy for cheaper for longer, so they're probably hoping that he can win it. But if he's not clearly better than Derek Coleman, then I think it's going to be Derek Coleman. And I think Derek Coleman brings you more than a Tukuafu, even though I think people are enamored with Tukuafu because he's so big. But Derek Coleman can bring more on special teams, and he can bring more in the receiving game, you know. And he's like a 4-5 guy, and, you know, Tukuafu was a 5 flat guy back in 2010. So he probably runs, I don't even know what he runs now, you know, but so I think there's a major difference in terms of just the speed there. So I think it's, you know, kind of the incumbents, and then possibly maybe the fullback could sneak in there. I think that would be kind of a fun little opportunity for the Seahawks if that could happen.
Yeah, and moving to the wide receiver position, Derek, what do you think? First of all, how many receivers do you think the Seahawks are going to keep? And then obviously past Doug Baldwin, Curse, and I guess Norwood, who do you think are the locks for the roster, or who do you think wins on that sort of bubble competition there?
You know, I think you could still consider Chris Matthews to be on the bubble. I think that he has. You could also consider him to be a contender to start. I mean, at the X. I mean, I think that what he did in the Super Bowl really came through and resonated with a lot of people. It wasn't a fluke. If you watch the tape, the route running, just his tracking of the ball and the way that he played. I mean, that's a big stage, and I don't think that's really a fluke. So I think he's got a chance to certainly not just make the roster, but be a regular lined up out wide, because they've needed that bigger guy out there. I do think, though, that, you know, if he has like a Chris Durham type of camp where he drops a few balls and struggles with concentration, or maybe looks like he came in with some assumptions that he had it made, or if anything like that. I think he's the type of guy who could absolutely sort of fall off if he doesn't really show up and continue where he left off. I think Lockett's obviously a lock. I think, and Lockett meaning Tyler Lockett.
Right.
I think Ricardo Lockett's certainly on the bubble too, because I think that beyond special teams, and even I thought his special teams were still hit or miss last year a little bit too.
Yeah.
So, I think that there are 3 or 4 spots probably up in the air, and I could see him keeping 6. And they always break camp with certain numbers, and then those numbers can change within a week or 2, or even a few days after they break camp. So
exactly,
it's hard to put a definitive number on that. But I'm watching Chris Matthews probably the closest, and then Ricardo Lockett just to see if he comes to the competition and really takes a big step forward and continues to do what we saw him do really the year before last as a gunner. So
tight end is really interesting. I mean, Jimmy Graham and Luke Wilson, don't think any questions there. But then if Anthony McCoy is able to stay healthy, you've got McCoy, Helfet, and Rayshawn Allen. So, Davis, what do you think there? How many tight ends do you see the Seahawks keeping?
I can see maybe 4, but they usually end up going 3. And I almost wonder if Anthony McCoy's healthy, I wonder if he gets it over Helfet just because he can kind of be more the blocking guy, because Luke Wilson and Jimmy are more the move guy, so to speak. So, but I could also see all 4. I think that could be a possibility, especially if you only carry 4 running backs and not 5. It's really, really difficult to carry 5 running backs and 4 tight ends. I think you pretty much really can't do it, because at that point you're really compromising kind of the O-line and the wide receiver. And so, it's going to be 3 or 4. And I think if Anthony McCoy is healthy, because he has a different role, that might be to his advantage.
And then moving to offensive line, typically the Seahawks carry anywhere from 8, 9, or 10 in terms of numbers. Derek, are there any guys sort of a dark horse in terms of getting on the roster that we're not really even thinking about right now that we haven't even mentioned?
I would say that I think that Gary Gilliam is still another guy that could fly under the radar a little bit as a guy to really contend for more time in there.
Yeah.
I just thought he showed really, really strong versatility, showed growth through the season. I know that they're high on his athleticism. So I think he's a guy that he's easy to forget about because you didn't see a lot of him last year. There's so much talk of the rookies. But I would put him, I'd give him a leg up over Sicoli for a spot right now, for sure. Just right now.
Right.
And I think he is a guy who has the makings of a starting caliber tackle from an athleticism standpoint. And from everything I've heard, he has been a great learner and a guy who's really embraced the system. So I think he's one that could fly under the radar a little bit. And then I'm just going to be really watching the development of Sicoli, because I think that, Sweezy really set the bar there for how quickly a guy can adapt. We didn't see Jarrett Smith do it, and there have been a couple of other experiments like that haven't worked. So either J.R. Sweezy is just an extreme aberration, or there's something to this, and Sicoli certainly has the makeup to be the perfect guy to try it on. So I'll be watching him and Gilliam probably the most in the preseason, just to see how well those guys adjust.
It seems like there could be moving on to the defensive side of the ball, it seems like there could be a really tough competition on the defensive line, just running off some names that you would assume are going to be there. Cliff Averill, Michael Bennett, Frank Clark, Jordan Hill, Tony McDaniel, Cassius Marsh, maybe. I mean, we'll all see how he bounces back, but obviously I think a lot of people were high on him last year. Brandon Mebane, Atiba Rubin, and then you've got some more competition behind those guys like Scruggs, Staten, Jesse Williams, Landon Cohen, who played in the Super Bowl, DeMarcus Dobbs. What are your thoughts on the defensive line, Davis, as far as how many they'll keep and who might end up on the outside looking in?
I think, if they keep Brandon, Tony, and Atiba, they're going to keep Michael Bennett. They're going to keep Jordan Hill. So I think when I look at D-line, I take edge out. For some reason, I always keep Bennett in this D-line group. On the edge, I usually have 4 guys, and then on the interior, it's usually like 6. So I was hoping Torrey Slater would be the 6th guy, but I think it might be DeMarcus Dobbs. The other guy could be Wormsley. So I was thinking it'd be more difficult for a Jesse Williams, DeAnthony Smith, Jimmy Staten, David King, and maybe a Greg Scruggs. But at the same time, if there's an injury there or they flash, they could possibly get that. You can really never have too many guys right now this time of year. They usually keep like 13 or so in that interior side. And then guys like Ryan Robinson, I don't think he can make it. I think Obam Gwacham is kind of a hybrid edge linebacker. Again, I think he's kind of going to be on the bubble. And then I think, Irvin, Averill, Frank Clark, and Cassius Marsh, are going to make it. But on the inside, I think that 6th interior spot might be DeMarcus Dobbs, possibly.
And moving to the linebackers position, Davis, you can pipe in if you know different numbers, but I think they keep around 6, 7, or 8 typically, because the linebackers are so important on the special teams units and things like that. Derek, first of all, what do you think of the Eric Pinkins switch to linebacker? Do you think he has a good shot at making the roster? And are there any surprises at that spot?
Yeah, I like the move because I think Eric Pinkins is a plus coverage guy when you put him in the slot or you put him over a tight end. He's got the length. He's certainly physical enough. I didn't really like the move to corner, personally, just based on tape. I just thought that he was a little bit too stiff in terms of flipping his hips and running. Certainly no doubt about his hands and his ability to dominate guys at the line. So I like him in space where he can cover. I think he's a good coverage guy, and he's certainly a downhill tackler. He's very physical, lower his shoulder. He's not afraid to stick his nose in there at the line of scrimmage and in the trenches. So I like the move. I think it served his instincts really well. And to be at that 230 for the 230 weight, he could, and to have the length, the 6'2", 6'3" height. I just think he's more of a prototypical Will type. That you can put out in space, and he can disrupt. The big thing I'll be watching with him, though, is just in that type of space now, dropping into zones from a linebacker spot and playing in the box a lot more. I'll just be looking really for his instincts, his ability to read plays and react to them.
Hey, Davis.
I think that's going to be the biggest adjustment for him. Dropping back and having all that space to sort of float in will be interesting.
Davis, you did a little bit of research on sort of the warrior position, the San Diego State 3-3-5 defense. I saw you tweeted about it a couple of months ago. Can you kind of explain what that is and how Pinkins fit into that and the history behind that a little bit?
I forget the name of the coach, but he's a pretty well-known guy. I think one guy that kind of put him on the map, and he's a head coach, but he's kind of more of a defensive specialist. And the guy that put him on the map, I think, was Brian Urlacher.
Yeah.
And Brian Urlacher was just a freak. And Pinkins doesn't play the position Brian Urlacher played. Urlacher played what they called the Lobo backer, which was essentially a linebacker that would also deep cover, like all the way back to the end zone. Kind of like a cover two, Mike linebacker that drops is exactly what he did, obviously, for the Chicago Bears. And, maybe he'll go to the Hall of Fame. And Brian Urlacher was a freak. He was like 6'3", and he caught touchdowns in college, and he also I think he returned 3 or 4 touchdowns on special teams.
Yeah, he did.
And so this Brian Urlacher guy is a special guy. But anyhow, the coach for SDSU, or he used to be at New Mexico or whatnot. They would face a lot of the spread offenses in that conference, which obviously you've seen the proliferation of that, and so they probably have less really, really good line of scrimmage players, just in terms of this is not the SEC, okay, and so and it's just kind of a different style of football. And so he would create a 3-3-5, which is basically 3 linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. And he felt that was kind of the best way to combat, the spread offenses, I guess the Boise States and whatnot of the world. And so the nickel secondary was 2 cornerbacks, 2 strong safeties, and 1 deep safety, free safety. So the Warrior safety is essentially a strong safety, but they have 2 of them. Okay? And so they align them a little bit different, and it's not necessarily a strong safety either, but essentially there's 5 defensive backs all the time, and he would basically be kind of one of the 2 strong safeties, I guess you would call it.
So his skill set kind of fits what he's likely going to be asked to do, with the Seahawks.
Yeah, because I think some of the stuff those guys would do would almost be what Shaq Thompson a little bit would do sometimes for Washington.
Yeah.
I know Pinkins is a taller player than Shaq Thompson, but so what happens in those situations is those guys get out on the field side, on the open side, the wide side. A lot of these other teams are going, into multiple receivers and whatnot, and so they end up kind of having to play a little bit of cornerback, a little bit, kind of like slot corner, without substituting. So guys like Shaq Thompson could find themselves in that position. I think Pinkins might have found himself in that position as well. So it's kind of just an interesting little defense, and this guy's kind of one of the few guys that runs it, and so that's kind of how they used Pinkins in that. So I could kind of see where the Seahawks are like, oh, he kind of is a linebacker. At the same time, they're like, oh, maybe he could play corner, that type of thing. You could kind of tilt your head and kind of see some of those elements.
Davis, who do you see winning the competition at free safety between Earl Thomas and Steven Terrell? So just going on to the defensive backs, how many do you guys see keeping? And is there a big competition in terms of who starts at like nickel or whatever? I mean, we're pretty certain that Kerry Williams is going to be over there on one side, right? So any surprises there? Davis?
Oh, I don't know who the nickel's going to be. That's kind of one of the big questions. Is it Ty Smith? Is it Marcus Burley? Is it Will Blackman? I don't know. I wonder if the Seahawks know as well. I think in terms of the safeties, my bet would be, Earl, Cam, Deshaun Shedd, and Ryan Murphy is kind of who I think will be the 4 safeties. But yeah, who the nickel player will be, I don't know. Derek, I don't know if you think Ty Smith could be that guy, or if you have any inkling of who our nickel player will be.
Yeah, I think Ty Smith is not. He didn't play a lot of nickel, and he hasn't played a lot of nickel. He has the movement skills to play in the nickel spot, but that spot is very, very. It's mentally challenging. And now, it sounds from everything I've heard from the coach and everything else, the guy's up to any challenge. I think if he does play nickel, it would take him some time, like it took Jeremy Lane to really learn the spot. But Jeremy came in, if you remember, as an outside guy pretty much only. So, but I think Ty has probably a little better athleticism and movement skills than Jeremy does. So he can be that guy. I think Marcus Burley's probably the more pure nickel guy of the current healthy group. In terms of just knowing it, having the instincts for it. But obviously he's got range limitations, and we saw those last year on display quite a few times. So I do think that if they need him to be, I think Ty Smith could develop into that guy. But I think Burley's probably the favorite out of the gate to be that guy with Lane down.
So a lot of good 53-man roster talk there for everyone, but just want to get on one more topic that I think, it's been going around for the last couple of weeks. It's been right at the forefront, whether or not it deserves to be there, due to the fact that we can't substantiate any rumors from either side. Is Russell Wilson subtweeting the Seahawks? Is John Schneider throwing Russell Wilson under the bus? It's definitely getting a little uglier than we'd like to see, but still don't feel any doubt in my mind that Wilson will be a Seahawk for as long as it matters for him to be a Seahawk. They're not going to let a guy like this get away, and eventually he's going to get paid pretty well. So Davis, I really want to know your thoughts here on the Russell Wilson contract. Is it something that you think is going to get done in July, or is this going to drag into next year?
I really don't know. I mean, I've heard different things that, they'll wait, and that if you look at the article that Danny O'Neill wrote, he basically said the Seahawks offered $80 million over 4 new years, so 5 people, okay? And it said they were tens of millions apart. So tens meaning at least 20 million apart. So I think it'd be fair to assume that Russell's asking for 100 million. And then the argument comes in terms of new money, APY, which is the real correct way to do a contract, which would be not talking about 2015, what he was already owed, but talking about 2016, 17, 18, and 19. When you factor in his really low 2015, it really changes the numbers so that when you have like the total APY, if that's closer to 16, that sounds like an insult. When you factor in the new money, that's kind of where I could see the club saying, hey, on the new money basis, we're offering you 19 or 20 or something like that because he's 2015 so low.
But is that fair, like, for them to, for when people say, oh, it'll bring it down to 16. So let's just say that they go through this whole year, he doesn't get a raise, he gets paid $1.5 million, and they get through the year, and then it's next year. And then let's say they offer him a 5-year contract worth $100 million. And is that supposed to be better? Because, I mean, I realize that, but let's say they offered him a 4-year for $80 million. Is that supposed to be better just because the other year is now behind him instead of in front of him? Because at that point, if he got a 5-year, $100 million deal, he's almost getting what Aaron Rodgers gets. It's just, why do we have to take this year into account? And what sort of what options do the Seahawks have? Can they completely wipe out his what he's owed this year? Can they just completely sort of throw the whole contract out the window and say, okay, now you're getting paid $22 million this year?
Yeah, they could, but again, ideally they'd like to keep his base salary really low and just give him a signing bonus. But that's kind of the cleanest way to do it is like, hey, we're going to give you a signing bonus and then we're going to keep your salary really low. When you do that, you keep their cap hit really low because a signing bonus you can prorate over 5 years. And typically when you do a deal with like a Percy Harvin or even a Richard Sherman, you pay a lot of times you'll either leave their salary intact or their first year base salary is really low. And the player's totally cool with that because they got a huge signing bonus, and kind of like as in like 1.5 times their salary anyway. So I think the right way to look at a contract is the new money, but I totally understand where Russell would come from and where certain fans would say, well, yeah, but on a total money basis, it looks more like an Andy Dalton deal where on a new money basis. But I do think the new money way is the actual correct way to really look at it. It's how I think contracts are looked at in the NFLPA and that type of thing. And the other difficult thing is Aaron Rodgers and Ben Roethlisberger and Matt Ryan and Joe Flacco. Well, Joe Flacco actually got his contract done on the spot, but the other guys were extended and they had money left on their old deals. And the money they had left on their old deals was actually significant money because that was either their second deal or they were first-round draft picks under the old CBA, so they had huge contracts anyway. And so, when you factor that in, it kind of is there's an apples to orange comparison. For instance, Ben Roethlisberger got a $99 million contract. Well, I think he was supposed to get $11 million anyway. So really, he got $88 million in new money over 4 years. That, I think, might be the magic number for Russell Wilson. If they can get to like a $90 million contract with 4 new years, 5 years total, which is about $88 million in new money, which is what Ben got, that could be possible middle ground. I don't know if the Seahawks are willing to go there. I don't know if Russell's willing to go there, but that is a possible middle ground, I think.
Would there be, and when people talk about unconventional sort of contracts, when you're only talking about $80 million or or whatever. But if they were making it a shorter deal where they didn't want that long-term commitment, and everyone feels pretty confident that Russell Wilson's going to be good for the next 4 years, could they offer him $80 million and just fully guarantee it?
I don't, I don't think they necessarily need to do that, because I think every other club except the Seahawks, they'd be trying to sign him to a 6-year deal. The Seahawks are putting 4 new years on the table. That in of itself is toward the player. That benefits the player. They did that type of deal with Doug Baldwin. They did that type of deal with Pete Carroll. They did that type of deal with Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman, basically taking 1 year off the deal to allow the player to go into free agency for a second time. And that's one reason why they've been able to close these deals before. So, to guarantee the whole thing and make it short, I mean, you're basically giving the player everything he could ever want.
Derek, you alluded earlier to some of the thoughts around Russell Wilson, just in terms of, the negotiations perhaps, or the personalities that are involved in this. So what are your thoughts and feelings in terms of how the negotiations are going to go?
Well, in terms of the negotiation aspect of it, you never really know. I think one thing has become, at least on the surface, somewhat apparent to me, or just my observation is, I definitely feel a sense of Russell Wilson being a lot more about Russell Wilson than maybe how he initially came off when he was first here. Now, granted, the guy has earned every bit of respect that he's gotten and continues to get from people, and I think that he's earned the right to be in that conversation among the top quarterbacks and what they're owed. I think if Seattle does, like some of the rumors with, they really offered him something more like what they offered. I think what was the rumor? The first one was it was closer to something like what Kaepernick got last year or something of that nature. I mean, I don't think that that's the right approach, because I think that he's shown that more than anything, his durability and his toughness, I think, it goes overlooked a lot, because the guy hasn't gotten hurt. There's little nicks here and there, but he'll stand. I think he'll stand the test of time in terms of his durability. He protects himself well, and he hasn't shown any real alarming regressions. He goes through lulls, but the guy is still a winner, and he continues to win, and he continues to do well in those situations where he needs to put the team on his back and win. And I think that makes you an elite quarterback. He's done it consistently. He's won games when it matters, and he's put the team on his back, and he's taken control of the game himself. I don't necessarily like the way he's portraying himself personally, just media-wise, social media. It's been a sort of a turnoff for me. I used to be a lot more of a Russell Wilson fan, just in the way that he carried himself. But that could also be just misperception, because social media does allow for a lot of misperception about guys. So when stuff's so ambiguous, it's really hard to tell what he's getting at. But the overall tone to me has changed to be a lot more about Russell being about Russell. And so, without making too many assumptions about that, I think he's going to stand pretty firm in the negotiations for whatever his agent and he feel he deserves. And I think that if Seahawks are anywhere near where they have a long way to go to get to where they need to be for this to happen. I don't really see him giving much in terms of ground. Doesn't do it on the field, and hasn't done it really off the field to any degree that we can see. So that's my take on it.
This final segment is called Cap Rap, where Danny Kelly freestyle raps about every player on the payroll. So go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, break it up. Yeah,
that's not a real segment, but I'm going to make sure that it is next time, just to hear Danny freestyle rap. That is the show, and we had some technical difficulties throughout, but I think we cleared it up at the end, and a lot of good information and talk about the Seahawks. Wouldn't you agree, Danny?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks again, guys, for coming on and sharing some of the insights that, if people are not on Twitter, I think it's something that is really valuable, because they're not seeing a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, let's throw out some plugs. Davis, plug whatever you'd like, including your Twitter.
Field Goals, obviously, and then Davis Sue Seattle, Davis HSU Seattle.
Is there a Davis? Is there an @Davis Sue out there that took your handle?
There must have been, because I probably went for that 4 or 5 years ago, and someone else had taken it, I guess. So.
And Derek, where can people find you?
I am going to be kind of popping up again on Twitter. I did take the draft season off this year to handle some business things and some other issues that all good stuff, but I was just overloaded. So I'm getting back to a place where things are a little more balanced. So I will be chiming in a lot more on Twitter at @DStevensScout, Stevens with a PH. And yes, all of my names and all of the easy forms of my name were taken as well. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Danny, anything that you want to plug or say?
No.
Okay. Of course, go to fieldgoals.com. Subscribe to the Real and the Field Goals podcast on iTunes and share and rate and all that stuff. And come back next week for another episode. We'll see you next week. Bye.